Fathers are supposed to protect their children. That's the most fundamental promise of parenthood. When a marriage falls apart, when custody battles turn bitter, the one thing that should remain sacred is the safety of the children. No matter how much anger exists between two adults, the children are supposed to be off limits. But for the children in these cases, the greatest threat didn't come from a stranger, it came from their own fathers, the men who were supposed to keep them safe. The men who tucked them into bed, taught them to ride bikes, promised to always be there. These fathers looked at their children and saw weapons. They saw the one thing guaranteed to destroy their ex-wives forever. These weren't crimes of passion or mental breakdowns. These were acts of revenge, calculated, premeditated murders designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on the mothers. These fathers killed their own children to punish women for leaving, to make ex-wives suffer in ways that would never end. And the courts made sure these fathers would never see daylight again. Today, we're covering 20 fathers who killed their children to spite their ex-wives. What you're about to hear will destroy any illusions you have about parental love being unconditional. These are the cases where love turned into the cruelest weapon imaginable. Case 1. John Battaglia. On the evening of May 2nd, 2001, Mary Jean Pearl dropped her two daughters off at Highland Park Village in Dallas, Texas, for a scheduled dinner visit with their father. It was supposed to be routine. Faith, 9 years old, was smart and funny. Liberty, 6 years old, dreamed of becoming a ballerina. Both attended John S. Bradfield Elementary School. Their father picked them up at approximately 5:30 in the evening and took them to his loft apartment in the Deep Ellum neighborhood. Mary Jean went to a friend's house. She expected her daughters home before bedtime. By the time the sun set, both girls would be dead, and Mary Jean would have heard the entire thing over the phone. John David Battaglia Jr. was 45 years old and worked as a CPA. He had graduated from Dimont High School in New Jersey, attended Fairleigh Dickinson University, and served in the US Marines. He married Mary Jean on April 6, 1991. From the outside, they looked like a normal family living in the affluent Highland Park area of Dallas. But John had a history that Mary Jean knew too well. He had assaulted his first wife, Michelle Getty, in 1988, breaking her nose and dislocating her jaw. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault in 1987 and received 2 years probation. When Mary Jean married him, she didn't know the full extent of his violence. She would learn soon enough. The marriage lasted nearly a decade, but Mary Jean endured years of verbal abuse. They separated in January 1999. On Christmas 1999, John attacked Mary Jean in front of Faith and Liberty. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and received 2 years probation. An agreed protective order was issued, barring him from owning firearms. The divorce was finalised in August 2000. Mary Jean thought the worst was behind her, but around Easter 2001, John left an angry voicemail that violated his probation. Mary Jean reported it to authorities. An arrest warrant was issued. On May 2, 2001, John learned about the warrant. Around noon that day, he left a message for his first ex-wife, Michelle Getty. He said maybe Mary Jean should lose her kids. Nobody understood what he meant at the time. That evening, after picking up Faith and Liberty, John brought them back to his loft at the Adam Hatz Lofts. At some point, he called Mary Jean. He put Faith on speakerphone. Faith asked her mother a question that would haunt Mary Jean for the rest of her life. "Mummy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" Then Mary Jean heard gunshots. She screamed into the phone, "Run! Run for the door!" Then she dialed 911. John Battaglia shot his 9-year-old daughter Faith 3 times, including a contact shot to the back of her head. Her body was found by the kitchen phone. He shot his 6-year-old daughter Liberty 4 times. The medical examiner would later testify that Liberty may have been alert between the spinal cord wound and the fatal headshot, meaning she felt herself dying. Her body was found 10 to 15 feet from the front door. She had tried to run. After killing both daughters, John left a voicemail for the girls. "Good night, my little babies. I hope you are resting in a different place." Then he went to a bar with his girlfriend. After the bar, he went to a tattoo parlor and got 2 red roses inked on his biceps, one for each daughter he had just murdered. Police spotted John's truck outside the tattoo parlor around 1 o'clock in the morning on May 3rd. It took 4 officers to restrain him. A search of his apartment and truck recovered 16 firearms total, including the semi-automatic pistol used to kill Faith and Liberty. The capital murder trial began on April 22, 2002, at the Frank Crowley Courts building in Dallas. Lead prosecutor Howard Blackman presented the evidence. Defense attorneys Paul Johnson and Paul Brachler tried to mount a defense, but the facts were overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 19 minutes before convicting John Battaglia of capital murder. 19 minutes. That's how long it took 12 people to decide this man deserved to die. On April 30th, 2002, John Battaglia was sentenced to death. Mary Jean Pearl addressed him directly in court. "You are one of the most heinous murderers of modern times," she said. "Burn in hell forever." John Battaglia spent the next 16 years on death row. 2 execution dates were stayed, in March 2016 and December 2016. But on February 1st, 2018, at the Huntsville unit in Texas, John Battaglia was executed by lethal injection. He was pronounced dead at 9:40 in the evening. His last words were bizarre and showed no remorse. "No, well, hi Mary Jean, see you all later. Bye, go ahead please." Then he said, "Am I still alive?" and laughed. No apology, nothing. Mary Jean Pearl witnessed the execution. Afterward, she told reporters, "I've seen enough of him." The case led to legislative change. Texas Senate Bill 140, signed on September 1, 2001, mandated that judges must consider domestic violence history when making custody decisions. Faith and Liberty's Place, a supervised visitation center operated by the Family Place in Dallas, was established in their memory. Author Irene Pence wrote a book about the case called No, Daddy, Don't, published in 2003. Mary Jean Pearl lost both her daughters in a single phone call because a man decided that if he couldn't control her, he would destroy her. Faith was 9 years old. Liberty was 6 years old. They were excited to see their father. They ran to the door when he arrived, and he murdered them to hurt their mother. John Battaglia executed his own daughters and spent his last moments on earth laughing. Case 2. Ronald Shanabarger. On the evening of June 19, 1999, the night before Father's Day, Ronald Lee Shanabarger wrapped plastic food wrap around his 7-month-old son's face, left the room to eat a sandwich, returned 20 minutes later, removed the plastic, placed the baby face down in his crib, and went to bed. The next morning, Tyler's mother found him blue and rigid with rigor mortis. What police initially ruled as SIDS would later be revealed as something far more sinister. The murder was the culmination of a 3-year revenge plot conceived before Tyler was even born. Ronald Lee Shanabarger was 30 years old and worked at a tire retreading center in Franklin, Indiana. He had been with his girlfriend Amy Parsons for years. In October 1996, Ronald's father died. Amy was on a cruise at the time. Ronald asked her to cut the trip short and come home. She refused. That refusal planted a seed in Ronald's mind that would grow into one of the most calculated murders in Indiana history. Ronald decided that Amy needed to feel the same grief he felt when his father died, but he didn't just want her to lose someone she loved. He wanted her to lose someone she had bonded with deeply, someone whose loss would devastate her completely. So he conceived a plan. He would marry Amy. They would have a child together. He would wait until she bonded with the baby. Then he would kill the child. They married in May 1997. Tyler was born on November 26, 1998. Ronald also took out a $100,000 life insurance policy on the infant. For 7 months, Ronald waited. He watched Amy fall in love with their son. He watched her feed him, bathe him, sing to him, hold him while he slept. And all the while, Ronald was planning to take that baby away from her. On the night of June 19, 1999, Amy was working a night shift as a grocery store cashier. Ronald was home alone with Tyler. He wrapped the baby's face in cellophane food wrap. Tyler was 7 months old. He couldn't fight back. He couldn't understand what was happening. Ronald left the room and made himself a sandwich. He ate it while his son suffocated in the next room. 20 minutes later, he came back, removed the plastic, and placed Tyler face down in the crib. Then Ronald Shanabarger went to bed. The next morning, Father's Day, Amy came home from her shift and went to check on Tyler. She found him face down, blue and cold. Rigor mortis had already set in. She screamed for help. Volunteer chaplain Reverend Randy Maynard arrived with first responders. He later noted that Ronald was cold, distant, and offering no comfort to his sobbing wife. The death was initially ruled as sudden infant sickness syndrome. 3 days later, on June 22nd, Ronald confessed to Amy. He told her everything: the plan, the waiting, the murder, the revenge. Amy drove him to the Johnson County Sheriff's Office the next morning, where he confessed to detectives. He was formally charged on June 24, 1999. During the investigation and trial, prosecutors documented 9 separate confessions. Ronald confessed to Amy. He confessed to detectives twice. He confessed to the chaplain. He confessed to his sister Benita and brother-in-law Larry Savage. He confessed in numerous letters. Police Chief Harry Ferrer confirmed that Ronald's story never changed. He had planned to kill Tyler from the moment he conceived him. The child's entire existence was part of a revenge plot. The 9-day jury trial began in late April 2002 at Johnson Superior Court. Special Judge Raymond D. Kickbush presided. Johnson County Prosecutor Lance Hamner led the prosecution. Defense attorneys Jay Hoffman and Jennifer Auger tried to build a defense, but the confessions were devastating. Physical evidence included DNA-matched cellophane wrap found in the yard and the $100,000 insurance policy Ronald had taken out on an infant. On May 8, 2002, Ronald Schannebarger was convicted of murder. On June 13, 2002, Judge Kickbush sentenced him to 49 years in prison. Not life without parole, 49 years, with the possibility of early release. Amy said through tears, "Happy Father's Day." Her father, Robert Parsons, declared, "Ronald, you'll burn in hell for this." Ronald Schannebarger is currently incarcerated in the Indiana Department of Correction. His earliest possible release was approximately March 2025, though records are unclear if he has been paroled. Appeals were filed in 2003 and 2006. Both were denied. Amy divorced Ronald. She established the Tyler Memorial Fountain and Pond at Independence Park in Franklin, dedicated in 2003. The insurance policy was never paid out. Tyler was 7 months old when his father murdered him. He never learned to walk. He never said his first word. He never celebrated his first birthday. His entire short life was nothing more than a weapon his father used to hurt his mother. Ronald Schannebarger waited 3 years to execute his revenge. He married a woman he didn't love. He fathered a child he planned to kill. He held that baby. He fed him. He put him to bed. And then he suffocated him with plastic wrap and ate a sandwich while his son died. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. While Ronald Schannebarger spent 3 years planning a single murder, the next father killed 3 children in a single afternoon with a knife. Case 3. Aaron Schaffhausen. On Tuesday, July 10, 2012, 3 sisters were excited when their father showed up for an unplanned visit at their home on Morningside Avenue in River Falls, Wisconsin. Amara was 11 years old, a budding scientist who watched MIT lectures online and studied algebra. Sophie was 8 years old, an artist who loved fashion and the outdoors. Cecilia was 5 years old, loved bugs and climbing, and would have started kindergarten that fall. All 3 rushed to the door when their father arrived. Within 2 hours, all 3 lay dead in their beds, with their throats slit and white t-shirts tied around their necks. Aaron Schaffhausen was 34 years old and worked as a construction foreman. He had married Jessica Lee Stotts on May 27, 2000 in Springfield. They moved to River Falls in 2006. For years, they seemed like a normal family, 3 beautiful daughters, a house in a quiet neighborhood. But the marriage was falling apart. Jessica filed for divorce on August 26, 2011. The divorce was finalized in January 2012. The separation enraged Aaron. He didn't accept that the marriage was over. He called Jessica up to 30 times a day. In March 2012, he told her something that should have resulted in his immediate arrest. He said he wanted to drive down there, tie her up, and make her pick which child he killed. Then he would make her watch. Jessica reported the threat to police. They classified it as a harassment incident. No arrest was made. No protective order was issued. Aaron remained free. Less than 2 weeks before the murders, Jessica began dating a man named Matthew Peterson. This was the final trigger for Aaron. On July 5, 2012, he was fired from his construction job at a St. Paul firm. 5 days later, he decided to act. At around 11:45 on the morning of July 10th, Aaron sent Jessica a text message requesting to visit the girls. Jessica consented. A babysitter was at the house. At approximately 1:25 in the afternoon, Aaron arrived. The babysitter left at 1:40. The girls were alone with their father. Between 1:40 and 3:30 that afternoon, Aaron Schaffhausen slit all 3 of his daughters' throats. Amara was 11 years old. She was killed in her bed. Sophie was 8 years old. She was killed in her bed. Cecilia was 5 years old. She was killed in her bed, and Aaron also strangled her to make sure she was dead. After murdering all 3 children, Aaron tucked them into their beds and tied white t-shirts around their necks. He also poured gasoline in the basement, though he never lit it. He would later be charged with attempted arson. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, Aaron called Jessica. She was at work in St. Paul. He said 5 words that destroyed her life. "You can come home now, because I killed the kids." Jessica stayed on the phone with police for 40 minutes while she drove from St. Paul to River Falls. The entire drive, she knew her daughters were dead. Police arrived at the house and found all 3 girls in their beds, throats slit, tucked in like they were sleeping. The knife Aaron used was recovered. His DNA was on the weapon. The girl's blood was on his clothing. There was no question about what had happened. On March 29, 2013, Aaron Schaffhausen entered a plea of guilty but insane. A 12-day insanity trial was held at St. Croix County Circuit Court before Judge Howard W. Cameron. The prosecution was led by Gary Freiberg from the Attorney General's office and District Attorney Eric Johnson. Defense attorney John Kuczynski argued that Aaron was legally insane at the time of the murders and could not be held fully responsible. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours. They found Aaron Schaffhausen sane. He knew what he was doing when he killed Amara, Sophie, and Cecilia. He understood it was wrong. He did it anyway. On July 15, 2013, Judge Cameron imposed 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Cameron told the courtroom, "Each child has to be recognised as an individual girl. The hardest thing for me was the girls ran to him with joy. They ran to the door, excited to see their father, and he murdered them." Aaron Schaffhausen is currently incarcerated at Warpun Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. In 2015, he appealed his conviction. The 3rd District Court of Appeals denied the appeal. He will die in prison. Jessica married Matthew Peterson in 2013. They had 2 more children together. In October 2022, Jessica published a memoir called Thistles and Thorns about surviving the loss of her daughters and rebuilding her life. In 2015, the Triangels Playground opened at Hoffman Park in River Falls. The community raised over $550,000 to build it. 3 angels, 3 sisters, 3 little girls who ran to their father with joy and died because he wanted to punish their mother. Amara was 11 years old. Sophie was 8. Cecilia was 5. They were excited to see their dad. He slit their throats and tucked them into bed. While Aaron Schaffhausen killed his daughters in the privacy of their home, the next father chose to murder his child in front of hundreds of witnesses during rush hour on one of the busiest bridges in Australia. Case 4. Arthur Freeman. On Thursday, January 29, 2009, at approximately 9:15 in the morning, Arthur Philip Freeman stopped his Toyota Land Cruiser on the Westgate Bridge in Melbourne, Australia. It was rush hour. The temperature had hit 42 degrees Celsius, a record-breaking heatwave. The bridge was packed with commuters heading into the city. Arthur got out of the vehicle, walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and picked up his 4-year-old daughter Darcy. Multiple witnesses heard her scream, "Daddy, no!" as he carried her to the railing. Then Arthur Freeman threw Darcy Iris Freeman 58 metres, nearly 190 feet, into the Yarra River below. It was supposed to be Darcy's first day of primary school. Arthur Philip Freeman was approximately 36 or 37 years old and worked in IT and finance. He lived in Geelong, Victoria. He had married a woman named Peter Barnes, and they had 3 children together. Ben was 6 years old, Darcy was 4, Jack was 2. On the surface, they looked like a normal family, but Peter knew the truth. Arthur was controlling, jealous, and violent. She had told her GP that she feared Arthur might harm the children. Peter left Arthur and filed for divorce. The family court became involved to determine custody arrangements. On January 28, 2009, one day before the murder, the family court made its final orders. Peter was granted increased custody time. Arthur's access to the children was restricted. He was furious. The next morning, January 29th, Peter was waiting at Darcy's new school for the first day of primary school. Darcy was supposed to arrive with Arthur, who had the children for a scheduled visit, but Darcy never arrived. Instead, Peter received a phone call. Arthur told her, "Say goodbye to your children." Then he said, "You'll never see your children again." Arthur drove to the Westgate Bridge with all 3 children in the car. Ben and Jack were in the back seat. Darcy was in the front passenger seat. He stopped the vehicle on the bridge. He got out. He walked around to Darcy's side, opened the door, and picked her up. She was 4 years old. She knew something was wrong. She screamed, "Daddy, no!" Witnesses on the bridge stopped their cars. Some got out and yelled at Arthur to stop, but Arthur carried Darcy to the railing and threw her over. She fell 58 metres into the water below. Emergency services pulled her from the river and airlifted her to the Royal Children's Hospital. Doctors worked desperately to save her, but the internal injuries were too severe. Darcy Iris Freeman died at 1:35 in the afternoon with her mother by her side. Ben and Jack witnessed everything from the back seat of the car. They watched their father murder their sister. The trial was held at the Supreme Court of Victoria from March 2nd to March 28, 2011. Justice Paul Coughlin presided. Prosecutor Gavin Silbert SC presented the case for the state. Defence counsel David Brustman SC argued for Arthur. 6 psychiatrists examined Arthur Freeman. 5 of the 6 concluded he was not mentally impaired at the time he killed Darcy. He knew what he was doing. He understood it was wrong. He did it to punish Peter. The jury consisted of 5 men and 7 women. They deliberated for 5 days. At several points, it looked like the trial might end in a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree. But on the evening of March 28, 2011, they reached a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. On April 11, 2011, Justice Coughlin sentenced Arthur Freeman to life imprisonment with a 32-year non-parole period. Freeman erupted in a bizarre rant about Satan and government conspiracies and was forcibly removed from the courtroom. He appealed the conviction in May 2011. The appeal was unsuccessful. Arthur Freeman is currently incarcerated at Barwon Prison in Geelong. He will not be eligible for parole until approximately January 29, 2041. He will be in his late 60s or early 70s if he lives that long. After Darcy's death, permanent anti-suicide barriers were erected on the Westgate Bridge. The barriers stand 2.1 metres tall. Since their installation, suicides on the bridge dropped 85%. Peter Barnes sued VicRoads for failing to install the barriers sooner. She won the lawsuit. The case was featured on the Australian television series Crimes That Shook Australia in 2016, and in Megan Norris's book, Look What You Made Me Do. Peter Barnes had dropped Darcy off for a court-ordered visit. She was waiting at the school for Darcy's first day of primary school. Instead, she got a phone call telling her to say goodbye to her children. Then she watched doctors try to save her daughter's life after Arthur threw her off a bridge in front of hundreds of witnesses during rush hour. Darcy was 4 years old. It was supposed to be her first day of school. She screamed, "Daddy, no!" and he threw her anyway. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Arthur Freeman threw his daughter from a bridge in broad daylight, but the next father chose a more isolated location, driving his 3 sons into a dam on Father's Day and leaving them to drown. Case 5. Robert Farquharson. On Sunday, September 4th, 2005, Father's Day in Australia, Robert Farquharson picked up his 3 sons for a visitation day. Jai was 10 years old, born in October 1994. Tyler was 7 years old, born in July 1998. Bailey was 2 years old, born in December 2002. They were typical country boys growing up in Winchelsea, Victoria, a small town about 30 kilometres from Geelong. Their mother Cindy had packed them into the car that morning, expecting them home that evening. By nightfall, all 3 boys would be dead at the bottom of a dam. and their father would claim it was an accident. Robert Donald William Farquharson was 36 years old and worked as a cleaner. He had met Cindy Louise Gambino in February 1990. They were together for a decade before marrying in 2000. But by late 2004, the marriage was falling apart. They separated. Cindy began a new relationship with a man named Stephen Mouls. This enraged Robert. He couldn't accept that Cindy had moved on. He couldn't accept that another man was in his children's lives, and he started talking about revenge. 2 months before Father's Day 2005, Robert had a conversation with a friend named Greg King, a bus driver. What Robert told Greg would become the most damning evidence in the case. Robert said he was going to pay Cindy back big time. He described planning an accident involving a dam where he would survive and the kids wouldn't. He specifically mentioned Father's Day because everybody would remember it. Greg King didn't take the threat seriously at the time. He would spend the rest of his life wishing he had. On Father's Day evening, Robert was driving his white 1989 VN Holden Commodore along the Princes Highway near Winchelsea with all 3 boys in the car. At approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, the car left the road and plunged into a 7.4 metre deep disused quarry dam. Robert escaped the vehicle. He swam to shore. His 3 sons drowned inside the car. Robert did not call emergency services. He did not attempt to rescue his children. He did not scream for help. Instead, he flagged down a passing car and asked to be driven to Cindy's house so he could tell her personally what had happened. When the driver suggested calling 000, Robert refused. When another person offered to call emergency services, Robert refused again. He insisted on being driven to Cindy's home to deliver the news himself. When Robert arrived at Cindy's house, soaking wet, he told her the car had gone into a dam and the boys were gone. Cindy's screams could be heard throughout the neighbourhood. Emergency services were finally called. Divers recovered the bodies. Jai's body was found protruding from the passenger door. Tyler and Bailey were found in the back seat. All 3 had drowned. Robert claimed he had suffered a coughing fit while driving. He said he blacked out from the coughing and the car veered off the road. He said he woke up underwater, managed to escape, but couldn't save his sons. The story sounded plausible to some people. Coughing fits can cause blackouts. Accidents happen. But Greg King came forward and told investigators about the conversation 2 months earlier. And accident reconstruction experts determined that a 220-degree steering wheel turn would have been necessary to send the car into that dam. You don't make a 220-degree turn during a coughing fit. The first trial began on August 21, 2007, at the Supreme Court of Victoria before Justice Philip Cummins. Remarkably, Cindy testified in Robert's defence. She believed it was an accident. She couldn't imagine that the father of her children would deliberately drown them. Greg King testified about the conversation. Prosecutors argued this was premeditated murder designed to punish Cindy. On October 5, 2007, Robert Farquharson was convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms. But on December 17, 2009, the Court of Appeal overturned the conviction due to disclosure failures during the trial. A retrial was ordered. The retrial began on May 4, 2010, before Justice Lex Lasry. Prosecutor Andrew Tinney SC presented the case again. Defence counsel Peter Morrissey SC argued for Robert. On July 22, 2010, the jury convicted Robert Farquharson a second time. On October 15, 2010, Justice Lasry sentenced Robert to life imprisonment with a 33-year non-parole period. He would not be eligible for parole until 2043. The High Court denied leave to appeal in 2013. Robert Farquharson is currently held at Barwon Prison in the Protection Unit. As of 2024, he is preparing a fresh appeal. Cindy Gambino married Stephen Mouls and had 2 more sons. She tried to rebuild her life. But on May 10, 2022, Cindy died at University Hospital Geelong from a cardiac episode. She was 50 years old. She was buried beside her 3 sons at Winchelsea Cemetery. In January 2024, Robert Farquharson's name was removed from the children's headstone. The boys' graves no longer acknowledge their father's existence. Author Helen Garner documented the case in her 2014 book This House of Grief. Jai was 10 years old, Tyler was 7, Bailey was 2. Their father drove them into a dam on Father's Day and twice refused to call emergency services because he wanted to deliver the news to their mother personally. He wanted to see her face when she learned her children were dead. While Robert Farquharson used a car as his weapon, the next father used something far more direct, a Glock pistol and 14 rounds of ammunition. Case 6. John Edwards. On Thursday, July 5, 2018, at 4:59 in the afternoon, 67-year-old John Edwards drove a rented white Commodore into the driveway of 107 Hull Road in West Pennant Hills, Sydney. He had been stalking his 13-year-old daughter from the train station. Inside the house, his 15-year-old son Jack was playing Fortnite on his computer. His sister Jennifer was home from school. Their mother Olga was at work. John Edwards walked into the house and fired 14 rounds from a 9mm Glock pistol. He was in and out in 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Both children died from multiple gunshot wounds. John Edwards was born on July 12, 1950. He was a retired financial planner who had fathered 10 children across 6 different relationships. He had a documented domestic violence history spanning the 1990s, with complaints from 5 ex-partners and 3 of his children. One ex-wife changed her name and fled to Queensland to escape him. But despite this extensive history of violence, the New South Wales Firearms Registry had granted him gun licences in 2016 and 2017. 15 of the 18 entries on his police profile related to apprehended violence orders, stalking, or assault. Registry clerks lacked formal training and failed to check properly. John Edwards purchased 3 rifles and 2 pistols legally. His relationship with Olga Edwards, a 36-year-old Russian-born solicitor, had ended years earlier. Olga had primary custody of their 2 children, Jack and Jennifer. John had limited visitation rights. He resented this. He resented Olga. And he began planning to take away what she loved most. On July 5, 2018, Jennifer caught the train home from her selective high school in Gosford. John followed her from the station to the house. Jack was inside playing Fortnite. The game was still running on his computer when police arrived hours later. Jennifer went to her brother's room. John entered the house through an unlocked door. He shot Jack multiple times in the chest. Jack died in his gaming chair. Jennifer heard the shots and assumed a fetal position under Jack's desk. John found her and shot her multiple times in the head, chest, abdomen, and extremities. Jack tried to shield his sister's body with his own. Both children died in Jack's bedroom. John Edwards left the house at 5:01 in the afternoon. The entire attack took 2 minutes and 11 seconds. He drove to his home in Normanhurst. Shortly after 6 o'clock in the evening, he used a .357 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver to shoot himself in the head. He died at the scene. Olga Edwards arrived home at approximately 6:30 that evening to find police at her house. Officers told her that Jack and Jennifer were dead. They told her John had murdered them. 6 months later, on December 13, 2018, Olga died by suicide at the same home. She was 37 years old. Police found her during a welfare check. She could not live with the loss of her children. Because John Edwards killed himself, there was no trial. Instead, a coroner's inquest was conducted by NSW State Coroner Magistrate Teresa O'Sullivan. Hearings were held from September through November 2020. The findings were delivered on April 7, 2021, in a 272-page report with 24 formal recommendations. Coroner O'Sullivan declared, "The evidence plainly reveals the deaths of Jack and Jennifer were preventable. The firearms licensing system had failed catastrophically. Despite John Edwards having 15 entries related to domestic violence on his police record, registry clerks approved his gun licenses. They didn't check properly, they didn't have adequate training, they didn't follow protocols, and 2 children died because of it." NSW Police Commissioner Mick Fuller apologised publicly. The state government announced reforms to the firearms licensing system. New protocols were implemented, requiring thorough background checks and domestic violence screening. Training for registry staff was overhauled, but Jack and Jennifer were still dead. Jack was 15 years old. He loved gaming. He was good at school. He had his whole life ahead of him. Jennifer was 13 years old. She attended a selective high school. She was brilliant. She had plans for university, for a career, for a future. Their father stalked Jennifer from the train station, walked into their home, and executed both of them in Jack's bedroom while Jack was playing Fortnite. Olga Edwards lost both her children in a single afternoon. 6 months later, she took her own life. 3 deaths, 1 family destroyed. All because a violent man was given access to guns he should never have been allowed to own. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. John Edwards used a gun to murder his children in their home, but the next father chose a method that required no weapons at all, just a car, a bridge, and the willingness to throw 4 toddlers into freezing water. Case 7. Lam Luong. On Monday, January 7th, 2008, Lam Luong drove to the top of the Dauphin Island Bridge in Mobile County, Alabama. The bridge, also called the Gordon-Persons Bridge, spans the Mississippi Sound. It rises approximately 85 feet above the water at its highest point. Lam waited for traffic to pass. Then he opened the car doors and threw his 4 children over the railing into the water below. Ryan was 3 years old. Hannah was 2. Lindsay was 1. Danny was 4 months old and had recently been hospitalized for heart problems. All 4 were alive when he threw them. Lam Luong was 37 years old and worked part-time as a shrimp boat fisherman. He was Amerasian, born to a Vietnamese mother and a black American serviceman during the Vietnam War. He immigrated to the United States as a refugee in 1984. He had prior arrests for crack cocaine possession in 1997, 2000, and October 2007. His life was unstable, marked by addiction and violence. He lived with his girlfriend, Q Ngoc Phan, who was 23 years old and worked at a nail salon. Ryan was her son from a previous relationship, but Lam had raised him as his own. Hannah, Lindsay and Danny were Lam's biological children with Q. After Hurricane Katrina destroyed their home, the family struggled financially. That's when Q discovered Lam's crack cocaine use. She left him and took the children. On the morning of January 7th, around 10 o'clock, Lam appeared at Q's nail salon. He asked her for $31 for gas money. She refused. That refusal became his trigger. If she wouldn't give him money, he would take away what mattered most to her. He would take her children. Lam picked up the children that day for what Q thought was a normal visitation. She strapped them into the car. Ryan in the front seat because he was the oldest. Hannah, Lindsay and Danny in the back. Q watched them drive away and went back to work. Lam drove straight to the Dauphin Island Bridge. He drove to the highest point and stopped the car. He waited until traffic cleared. Then he opened the doors and began throwing them over the railing one by one. Ryan, the 3-year-old stepchild, went first. Then Hannah, 2 years old. Then Lindsay, 1 year old. Finally, Danny, just 4 months old, the baby who had been hospitalized for heart problems weeks earlier. All 4 children were conscious when he threw them. All 4 fell 85 feet into the Mississippi Sound. The bodies were recovered over the next 2 weeks. The currents in the Mississippi Sound are strong and unpredictable. Danny was found 12 miles from the bridge. Ryan was found 16 miles away. Lindsay was recovered 18 miles away in Mississippi. Hannah travelled the farthest. Her body was found 144 miles away in Louisiana. That night, Lam told Q the children were with somebody else. She believed him. The next day, January 8th, he confessed. He told her all 4 children were dead. Q later told investigators that Lam kept laughing while he confessed. He was laughing. His children were dead at the bottom of the Mississippi Sound, and he was laughing. He said the bodies would never be found. Detectives who interviewed Lam reported that he told them he wanted to see his wife's face when they told her he killed all 4 of her children. That was the goal. Not just to kill the children, but to watch her face when she learned they were dead, to see her destroyed. Q's quote to the media became one of the most heartbreaking statements in this case. Why didn't he kill me instead of the children? The trial was held in Mobile County before Circuit Judge Charles Graddick. District Attorney John Tyson Jr. prosecuted the case. On March 19, 2009, Lam Luong was convicted on 4 counts of capital murder. On April 29, 2009, Judge Graddick sentenced him to death. Graddick made an unusual order. He ordered prison officials to show Lam Luong photographs of all 4 children every single day on death row. Every morning, guards were instructed to bring him photos of Ryan, Hannah, Lindsay, and Danny. But in 2018, IQ testing revealed that Lam Luong had an IQ of 51. Under the Supreme Court case Atkins versus Virginia, individuals with intellectual disabilities cannot be executed. On October 15, 2018, Judge James Patterson vacated the death sentence and re-sentenced Lam Luong to life without parole. Judge Patterson stated that Luong richly deserves to die, but that the law required commutation based on his intellectual disability. Lam Luong is currently serving life without parole in the Alabama Department of Corrections. A granite memorial was erected at Maritime Park in Bayou La Batre in May 2008, honouring Ryan, Hannah, Lindsay and Danny. Ryan was 3 years old, Hannah was 2, Lindsay was 1, Danny was 4 months old. Their father threw them off a bridge into freezing water because their mother refused to give him $31 for gas. He laughed when he confessed. He wanted to see her face when she learned they were dead. While Lam Luong threw his children from a bridge in a matter of minutes, the next father took 5 hours to methodically kill all 5 of his children inside their home before driving their bodies across state lines. Case 8. Timothy Jones Jr. On Thursday, August 28, 2014, Timothy Ray Jones Jr. murdered all 5 of his children inside their mobile home on South Lake Drive in the Red Bank neighborhood of Lexington County, South Carolina. The killings unfolded over approximately 5 hours. When it was over, he loaded their bodies into his SUV and drove through the southeast for 9 days, logging over 700 miles, before disposing of them along a logging road near Camden, Alabama. He was still driving around with 5 decomposing bodies in his vehicle when police finally stopped him at a routine checkpoint. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. was born on December 28, 1981. He was 32 years old and worked as a computer engineer for Intel, earning between $71,000 and $82,000 per year. He had graduated from Mississippi State University in 2011. His mother had diagnosed schizophrenia. Timothy self-medicated with synthetic marijuana, using it up to 5 times daily. He was paranoid, increasingly erratic, and losing his grip on reality. Timothy had married a woman named Amber Kaiser in June 2004 when she was 18 and he was 22. They had 5 children together. Nathan Haysed Jones was born in 2008, Mera Gracie Jones in 2006, Elias Javier Jones in 2007, Gabriel Asher Jones in 2012, Abigail Elaine Jones in 2013. All attended Saxe-Gotha Elementary or daycare, but Timothy became controlling. He monitored Amber constantly. The marriage became suffocating. In 2013, Amber had an affair. Timothy filed for divorce. The divorce was finalised in October 2013, and in a decision that would haunt Amber for the rest of her life, the court awarded primary custody to Timothy. Amber lacked the resources to contest it. The judge saw a computer engineer with a stable job. Amber got limited visitation. The South Carolina Department of Social Services visited Timothy's home approximately a dozen times between 2011 and 2014. On August 13, 2014, just 15 days before the murders, a DSS worker noted that Timothy appears to be overwhelmed. The worker documented bruises on the children, but the investigation was not concluded before the children died. On August 28th, Timothy decided the children were interfering with his ability to work. He had been fired from Intel weeks earlier. He was using synthetic marijuana multiple times a day, and he blamed the children. 6-year-old Nathan was forced to do exercises as punishment. The exact cause of Nathan's death remains undetermined, but he died first. Then Timothy strangled 8-year-old Mira with his bare hands. He strangled 7-year-old Elias with his bare hands. He choked 2-year-old Gabriel with a belt. He choked 1-year-old Abigail with a belt. The killings took approximately 5 hours. He killed them methodically, one by one. After murdering his children, Timothy wrapped their bodies and loaded them into his SUV. Then he started driving. For 9 days he drove through South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama and Mississippi, with 5 decomposing bodies in his vehicle. He stopped at gas stations, he ate at restaurants, he slept in his car. On September 6, 2014, Timothy was stopped at a routine checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. Officers noticed a foul odour. They found blood, maggots, and evidence of decomposition. Timothy was taken into custody. For 2 days, investigators interrogated him. Finally, he confessed and led officers to where he had dumped the bodies, along a remote logging road near Camden, Alabama. The trial was held at Lexington County Court of General Sessions before Judge Eugene C. Griffith, Jr. Solicitor Rick Hubbard prosecuted. Defense attorney Boyd Young argued that Timothy was insane, but the prosecution argued that Timothy knew exactly what he was doing. He killed the children. He wrapped their bodies. He drove for 9 days trying to hide what he had done. On June 4, 2019, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Timothy Jones Jr. guilty on 5 counts of murder. On June 13, 2019, after approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to death. During the sentencing phase, Amber Kaiser testified. She stood before the jury and said something remarkable. "He did not show my children mercy by any means, but my kids loved him, and if I'm speaking on behalf of my kids, that's what I have to say." She told the jury she was okay with whatever they decided. She simply spoke for her children, who had loved their father even as he killed them. Timothy Jones Jr. is currently on death row at Kirkland Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. The South Carolina Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and sentence on March 29, 2023. In July 2024, Amber settled a lawsuit against the South Carolina Department of Social Services for $1.5 million. DSS had visited the home a dozen times. They documented bruises. They noted Timothy was overwhelmed, but they never removed the children. Nathan was 6 years old, Mira was 8, Elias was 7, Gabriel was 2, Abigail was 1. Their father strangled them, choked them with belts, and drove around with their bodies for 9 days before dumping them along a logging road like trash. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Timothy Jones Jr. killed his children in private and tried to hide the bodies, but the next father made sure his ex-wife heard everything as it happened. A social worker pounded on the door while the house exploded with 2 boys inside. Case 9. Josh Powell. On Sunday, February 5, 2012, at approximately 12:05 in the afternoon, a social worker named Elizabeth Griffin Hall brought 2 young boys to their father's house for a supervised visit. Charlie was 7 years old, Braden was 5. They were excited to see their dad. They ran to the front door of the house at 8119 189th Street Court East in Graham, Washington. Their father, Joshua Powell, opened the door and said he had a big surprise. He pulled both boys inside and slammed the door in the social worker's face. She immediately smelled gasoline. She pounded on the door. She called 911. The dispatcher asked irrelevant questions. It took 21 minutes for officers to arrive. 2 minutes after the first 911 call, the house exploded. Joshua Powell had attacked his sons with a hatchet, doused the house in gasoline, and triggered an explosion that killed all 3 of them. Joshua Stephen Powell was born on January 20th, 1976. He was 36 years old. He was already the sole person of interest in the 2009 disappearance of his wife, Susan. On December 6, 2009, Susan Marie Powell vanished from their home in West Valley City, Utah. Josh claimed he had taken their 2 toddlers camping at midnight in freezing temperatures. Nobody believed him. Susan's handwritten will stated clearly, "If I die, it may not be an accident." Police suspected Josh killed her, but they never found her body. They never had enough evidence to charge him. After Susan disappeared, Josh moved to his father Stephen Powell's home in Puyallup, Washington. Stephen Powell was later arrested on voyeurism charges in September 2011 for secretly recording women and young girls. After Stephen's arrest, Charlie and Braden were placed with Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox. The Coxes loved their grandsons and fought desperately to protect them. They knew Josh was dangerous. They knew what he had done to Susan. On February 1st, 2012, a judge denied Josh custody and ordered a psychosexual evaluation. Josh was losing. The court was closing in. He was never going to get his sons back. 4 days later, on February 5th, he decided that if he couldn't have them, nobody would. Elizabeth Griffin Hall had been supervising visits between Josh and his sons for 3 months. She worked for the Foster Care Resource Network. On February 5th, she arrived at Josh's rental house with Charlie and Braden for a scheduled, supervised visit. The boys were happy. They ran to the door. Josh opened it and told them he had a big surprise. Charlie and Braden rushed inside. Josh grabbed them and slammed the door shut. Elizabeth smelled gasoline immediately. She pounded on the door. She screamed for Josh to open it. He didn't respond. Elizabeth called 911. The dispatcher was a man named David Loverack. Elizabeth told him clearly, "Josh Powell will not let me in the door. This could be life-threatening." Loverack asked irrelevant questions. He wanted her address. He wanted details about the custody arrangement. He seemed confused about whether to send police or social services. Elizabeth was frantic. She could smell gasoline. She knew something terrible was about to happen. But Loverack didn't grasp the urgency. It took 21 minutes for officers to arrive. 21 minutes. 2 minutes after Elizabeth's first 911 call, the house exploded. Josh had attacked Charlie and Braden with a hatchet. Charlie suffered a chop wound to his neck. Braden suffered chop injuries to his head and neck. Then Josh doused the entire house in gasoline and triggered an explosion. All three died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Charlie slept under a Spider-Man bedspread. Braden had Disney Cars pillow sheets. Those small details were documented by investigators sorting through the wreckage. Elizabeth screamed into the phone. "He exploded the house. He blew up the house and the kids." She was hysterical. She had just witnessed 2 children murdered. David Loverack was formally reprimanded for his handling of the 911 call. His delays may have cost Charlie and Braden their lives. There was no trial because Josh Powell killed himself in the explosion, but Chuck and Judy Cox filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. They argued that social workers should never have allowed supervised visits to continue. Josh was a murder suspect. His father was a convicted sex offender. The house was not a safe place for children. In July 2020, a Pierce County jury awarded Chuck and Judy Cox $98.5 million. A court of appeals reinstated this amount in 2023. Attorney Ann Bremner represented the Coxes. Josh's father, Stephen Powell, was convicted on May 16, 2012, of 14 counts of voyeurism. He died on July 23, 2018, at age 68. Josh's brother, Michael Powell, died by suicide on February 11, 2013. He was 30 years old. Police believed Michael had helped Josh conceal Susan's body. The guilt apparently became too much. Susan Powell has never been found. Her case remains officially open, but cold. Her family believes Josh killed her and buried her body somewhere in the Utah desert. They believe Michael helped, but without a body, there will never be a murder conviction. Charlie was 7 years old. Braden was 5. They ran to their father's door, excited to see him. He told them he had a surprise. Then he attacked them with a hatchet, doused the house in gasoline, and blew them up. A social worker stood outside pounding on the door, while 2 little boys died inside. The 911 dispatcher asked irrelevant questions for 21 minutes while the house burned. Josh Powell murdered his wife and got away with it. Then he murdered his sons to make sure Susan's parents would suffer the same loss he had inflicted on them. While Josh Powell used an explosion to kill his children and himself, the next father survived his attack and forced his daughter to watch him murder her little brother. Case 10. Christopher Hawkins. On Sunday, September 23, 2007, at a terraced house on Royd Street in Hilltop, Slaithwaite, Huddersfield, England, Christopher Hawkins stabbed his 2 children. His 4-year-old son Ryan was stabbed 9 times and killed. His 14-year-old daughter Donna was stabbed at least 13 times and survived. The attack happened 1 week after Ryan's 4th birthday. It happened 1 day after Christopher and his wife's 17th wedding anniversary. Christopher Hawkins was 47 years old and worked as a sheet metal worker. He had married Valerie G., also known as Valerie Hawkins, in 1990. They had 3 children together. Natalie was 16, Donna was 14, Ryan was 4. For years the marriage looked normal from the outside, but inside the home, Christopher was violent. He was a heavy drinker with a documented history of domestic violence. He punched Valerie on Christmas Eve, he throttled her, he spat on her. In January 2007, he attempted to strangle Valerie while she was holding baby Ryan. In July 2007, Valerie alleged he imprisoned and raped her at knife point. In May 2007, Valerie told Christopher she no longer loved him. She began dating a taxi driver named Lee Tinker. Christopher was enraged. He couldn't accept that the marriage was over. He couldn't accept that Valerie had moved on. Notes were later found in Christopher's bedroom. They read, "Me and Ryan are going to heaven on September 16th. And, to Val, who I will love forever, that's why me and my son are going to die." On September 23rd, Donna arrived at the house to collect her little brother Ryan. Christopher opened the door and said, "I'm sorry." Then he attacked her. He stabs Donna repeatedly with a knife. She fought back. She screamed. When she told him she didn't hate him, he stopped stabbing her. Then he said something that still haunts her. "I'm going to kill Ryan now." Donna tried to stop him, but she was too badly injured. She escaped the house and collapsed outside. A shopkeeper named Waqar Zaman and his assistant Michelle White saw Donna bleeding on the street. They provided first aid that saved her life. Donna had been stabbed at least 13 times. She had wounds to her face, chest, abdomen, arm and thigh. 2 abdominal wounds penetrated her liver. 1 deflated a lung. She should have died. But Zaman and White kept her alive until paramedics arrived. Inside the house, Christopher Hawkins stabbed his 4-year-old son Ryan 9 times. 2 of those stab wounds penetrated Ryan's heart. Ryan tried to fend off the knife with his small hands. The medical examiner found defensive wounds, showing Ryan fought to live. But he was 4 years old. His birthday had been 1 week earlier, on September 16th. He never had a chance. After murdering Ryan, Christopher walked to the Silent Woman pub on Nabs Lane. He ordered a pint of beer. He sat down with a friend named Robert Burns and told him he had stabbed his children. Then he walked to a churchyard where police arrested him. He told officers, "I will commit suicide for what I've done. I've stabbed my son and my daughter. Why did I do it? Because my wife is having an affair and I took it out on them." The trial was held at Leeds Crown Court in March 2008. The Honourable Mr Justice Wilkie presided. Prosecutor Simon Myerson QC presented the case. The evidence was overwhelming. Christopher had confessed. Donna survived to testify. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before finding Christopher guilty of murder and attempted murder. On sentencing day, Justice Wilkie told Christopher, "I am satisfied you used Ryan cold-heartedly as a vehicle for avenging your wife." He sentenced Christopher to life, with a minimum of 21 years for murder. He received an additional 12 years for attempted murder to run concurrently. Christopher's minimum tariff expires in 2029. Donna received a Diana Award for her fundraising efforts for a memorial to Ryan at Meal Hill Recreation Ground. She has spent years raising awareness about domestic violence. She turned her trauma into advocacy. By 2017, it was reported that Christopher Hawkins was being granted supervised day release from prison. Donna continues to live with the physical and emotional scars of that September day when her father stabbed her 13 times and murdered her baby brother in front of her. Ryan was 4 years old. 1 week earlier, he had celebrated his birthday. His father stabbed him 9 times. Ryan tried to fight back with his small hands. He had defensive wounds showing he tried to live. His sister Donna was 14 years old. She survived 13 stab wounds and had to listen to her father announce he was going to kill her little brother. Then he did it. Christopher Hawkins murdered his son and tried to murder his daughter to punish his wife for leaving him. He told police exactly why he did it. Because his wife was having an affair and he took it out on the children. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Christopher Hawkins stabbed his children in their home, but the next father chose a more drawn-out method, forcing his ex-wife to listen over the phone as he killed their 4 sons with carbon monoxide poisoning in a remote lay-by. Case 11. Keith Young. On the night of Thursday, March 27, 2003, Keith Young drove his 4 sons to a remote lay-by near the Ponderosa Cafe on the Horseshoe Pass near Llangollen, North Wales. Joshua was 7 years old, Thomas was 6, Callum was 5, Daniel was 3. Keith told them they were going on an adventure. He dressed them in their pyjamas, packed pillows and quilts, and settled them in the back of the family's Mitsubishi Shogun. The boys thought they were camping. They had no idea their father was driving them to their deaths. Keith Young was 38 years old, a farm labourer and pub bouncer from Winsford, Cheshire. He had met Samantha Tolley when she was just 14 years old, and he was approximately 24. The relationship continued for years before they married in June 2001. Samantha endured chronic domestic violence throughout the marriage. Keith broke her wrist during one assault. He beat her repeatedly. He controlled every aspect of her life. After a violent assault on Christmas 2002, Samantha finally left. She obtained court orders against Keith and moved to Weaverham with the boys in January 2003. She started a new relationship. In March 2003, she discovered she was 5 weeks pregnant by her new partner. When she told Keith during a shopping trip, the coroner would later conclude, "I believe your pregnancy was the trigger." 2 days before the murders, Keith told someone that if he couldn't have Samantha, he didn't want the children. On the night of March 27th, Keith picked up Joshua, Thomas, Callum and Daniel for what was supposed to be a normal visitation. Samantha kissed each boy goodbye and watched them climb into the Shogun. Keith drove them to the Horseshoe Pass and parked at the lay-by near the Ponderosa Cafe. He settled the boys in the back with their pillows and quilts. They fell asleep quickly. Keith took a petrol lawnmower from the back of the Shogun and placed it inside the vehicle. He started the engine. Carbon monoxide began filling the enclosed space. The boys were sleeping. They didn't wake up. As the gas filled the car, Keith called Samantha. She answered the phone expecting a normal conversation. Instead, Keith said, "Save your breath." Then he said, "I hope you are happy. I hope you have a grudge against that baby for the rest of your life." She realised something was wrong. He asked if she could hear the lawnmower running. She said yes. He asked if she could hear her children. She said yes. Then Keith forced Samantha to listen as her sons died one by one. At approximately 1:15 in the morning, Keith told Samantha, "It's too late. Dan's dead." 3-year-old Daniel had died first. Samantha screamed and begged Keith to stop. He refused. Then Keith put 7-year-old Joshua on the phone. He ordered Joshua to say goodbye to his mother and tell her he loved her. Joshua, barely conscious from the carbon monoxide, said, "Goodbye, Mummy. I love you." Then the phone went back to Keith. Keith reported as each boy died. Thomas went next, then Callum, finally Joshua. Samantha listened to the entire thing. She was on the phone with Keith for hours while he murdered their sons. She heard them struggling to breathe. She heard them going silent one by one. She couldn't hang up because Keith kept talking to her, describing what was happening. Police traced the phone signal to the Horseshoe Pass. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on March 28th, PC Andy Phillips located the vehicle in the lay-by. He smashed the passenger window with his baton. A boy's body fell from the footwell. All 4 boys and Keith were dead inside. The lawnmower was still running. The Home Office pathologist confirmed the deaths would have been painless. The boys became drowsy from the carbon monoxide and fell asleep. They never woke up. They died in their sleep, thinking they were on a camping adventure. But Samantha suffered. She heard the entire thing. An inquest was held on September 16, 2003, at Wrexham Coroner's Court. North East Wales coroner John Hughes recorded unlawful killing on all 4 boys and suicide for Keith. Hughes called it one of the most harrowing cases I've dealt with. He told Samantha that her testimony was one of the most difficult things he had ever heard. Samantha also lost the baby she was carrying. The stress and trauma caused a miscarriage weeks later. So Keith didn't just kill Joshua, Thomas, Callum and Daniel. He also killed the baby Samantha was pregnant with. 5 children gone because Keith couldn't accept that Samantha had moved on. A memorial plaque was erected at the Horseshoe Pass where the boys died. A memorial garden was established at Handley Hill Primary School in Winsford, where the boys had attended. Joshua was 7 years old, Thomas was 6, Callum was 5, Daniel was 3. Their father forced their mother to listen over the phone as he murdered them with carbon monoxide poisoning. He made her hear each one die. He put Joshua on the phone and made him say goodbye. Then he killed him. While Keith Young killed his children on a remote mountain pass, the next father chose an equally isolated spot in Snowdonia and left explosive devices at home as a final message to his ex-wife. Case 12. Brian Philcox. On Saturday, June 14, 2008, Brian Philcox parked his light blue Land Rover Freelander at a remote spot off the A470 between Mainen and Tallycavern in the Conwy Valley, Snowdonia, Wales. It was the day his divorce decree nisi was finalised. The next day, Father's Day, a passerby found all 3 bodies. 7-year-old Amy Philcox and 3-year-old Owen Philcox were dead in the vehicle alongside their father. Brian had used chloroform and a sleeping drug to render them unconscious, then piped exhaust fumes into the car. The coroner stated the children would not have known what was happening. Brian Philcox was 52 years old, a karate instructor, security guard, and chairman of the Federation of English Karate Organisations. He was from Runcorn, Cheshire. His first wife Jan had died of Hodgkin's disease. He later married Lynn McAuliffe, who was 37 years old. They had 2 children together. Amy was 7, Owen was 3. Brian was also a supporter of Fathers for Justice, a controversial advocacy group for fathers' rights in custody disputes. In August 2007, Lynn left Brian and moved with the children to live with her mother. She had endured years of controlling behaviour. Brian was jealous, possessive, and violent. He monitored her phone calls. He demanded to know where she was at all times. Lynn told people close to her that she feared Brian might harm the children. In April 2008, Warrington County Court awarded sole residence to Lynn, with unsupervised access for Brian. The court decision infuriated him. He felt betrayed by the legal system. On June 14, 2008, the divorce decree nisi was finalised. Brian received the paperwork that morning. The marriage was legally over. He picked up Amy and Owen for a scheduled visit. Lynn hugged them goodbye and watched them drive away in Brian's Land Rover. Brian drove them to the remote location in Snowdonia. He parked off the A470 in a spot that was isolated and unlikely to be disturbed. He gave Amy and Owen chloroform and a sleeping drug. The children became drowsy and fell asleep in the back seat. They didn't wake up. Then Brian piped carbon monoxide from the exhaust into the vehicle. Amy was 7 years old. Owen was 3. They died in their sleep, unaware their father was killing them. But Brian had prepared one final act of revenge. He had rigged homemade explosive devices at the family home. A note addressed to "the bitch" was glued to the kitchen worktop, rigged to detonate if moved. A second device was hidden under the kitchen table. A third device was mailed to Lynn's son Ryan and arrived on Monday, June 16th. Around 40 residents were evacuated while bomb disposal teams dismantled the devices. On Saturday evening, before he killed himself, Brian phoned Lynn and left a voicemail. He said repeatedly, "There's nothing I can do. It's out of my control now." His voice was calm. Then he said, "I have left you a present. I'll make the papers. Just you wait." Lynn listened to the voicemail and felt a chill. She tried calling him back. No answer. She called his mobile repeatedly through the night. No response. The next morning, Father's Day, a passerby spotted the Land Rover parked in the remote lay-by. The windows were fogged. He looked inside and saw bodies. He immediately called police. Officers arrived and confirmed all 3 were dead. Amy and Owen were in the back seat, tucked under blankets. Brian was in the driver's seat. An inquest was held in Llandudno. Coroner John Gittins of North East Wales recorded unlawful killing for both children and suicide for Brian. The inquest heard evidence about the chloroform and sleeping drugs found in the children's systems, the explosive devices found at the family home, and the voicemail Brian had left. Gittins told Lynn, "When he took Amy and Owen from you, his intention was that they would be lost to you forever. But he failed because their lives are imprinted on your heart." Lynn described Brian as a cold-blooded, premeditated killer. She told the inquest that Brian had planned every detail: the drugs to sedate the children, the remote location, the explosive devices, the voicemail. He wanted to destroy her completely. He wanted to take her children and then kill her with a bomb. The case was featured in Channel 4's documentary series Dispatches in 2008. The investigation was led by DCI Wayne Jones of North Wales Police. Amy was 7 years old. Owen was 3. Their father drugged them so they wouldn't wake up, then poisoned them with carbon monoxide on the day his divorce was finalised. He left explosive devices at home to kill their mother. He left a voicemail saying he had left her a present and that he would make the papers. 2 children dead on Father's Day because their father couldn't accept that the marriage was over. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Brian Philcox used carbon monoxide and left explosive devices behind. But the next father in Canada used a knife and claimed a mental breakdown allowed him to avoid criminal responsibility entirely. Case 13. Guy Turcotte. On the night of February 20th, 2009, in the wealthy Montreal suburb of Piedmont, Quebec, Dr. Guy Turcotte stabbed his 2 children to death. Olivier was 5 years old, Anne-Sophie was 3. Guy stabbed them a combined total of 46 times. He stabbed Olivier 27 times. He stabbed Anne-Sophie 19 times. Then he drank 2 bottles of windshield washer fluid in an apparent suicide attempt. He survived. His children did not. Guy Turcotte was 34 years old, a cardiologist at Hôpital du Sacré-Cœur in Montreal. He was successful, respected, and well paid. He had married Isabelle Gaston in 2001. They lived in a beautiful home in Piedmont. They had 2 children together. Olivier was born in 2003, and Sophie was born in 2005. To everyone on the outside, they looked like the perfect family. A doctor father, a loving mother, 2 beautiful children. But inside the marriage, things were falling apart. Isabelle had begun an affair with a man named Martin Hewitt in late 2008. She told Guy she wanted a divorce in January 2009. Guy was devastated. He couldn't accept that the marriage was over. He couldn't accept that Isabelle had chosen another man. On February 20th, 2009, Isabelle went to spend the evening with Martin Hewitt. Guy was home alone with Olivier and Anne-Sophie. That evening, Guy put the children to bed. Olivier slept in his own room, Anne-Sophie slept in hers. Then Guy went into Olivier's room with a kitchen knife. He stabbed his 5-year-old son 27 times. Olivier fought back. He had defensive wounds on his hands, showing he tried to protect himself. But he was 5 years old. He didn't stand a chance against a grown man with a knife. Then Guy went into Anne-Sophie's room. He stabbed his 3-year-old daughter 19 times. Anne-Sophie was too young to fight back. She was killed in her bed. After murdering both children, Guy drank 2 bottles of methanol windshield washer fluid. Methanol is poisonous. Guy intended to kill himself. He wanted to die alongside his children, but he survived. The next morning, a family member found Guy unconscious in the home with the bodies of Olivier and Anne-Sophie. Police and paramedics were called. Guy was rushed to hospital. He recovered. Guy was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. His first trial was held in 2011 at the Saint-Jérôme courthouse. Guy's defense team argued that he was not criminally responsible for his actions due to a mental disorder. They claimed he had been in a state of extreme emotional distress and had suffered a mental breakdown. A jury heard evidence about Guy's state of mind on the night of the murder. On July 5, 2011, the jury found Guy not criminally responsible on account of mental disorder. The verdict meant that Guy would not go to prison. Instead, he would be sent to a psychiatric facility. The decision was controversial. Many people in Quebec were outraged. They believed Guy had murdered his children in a calculated act of revenge and should spend the rest of his life in prison. The Crown appealed the verdict. In 2013, the Quebec Court of Appeal ordered a new trial. The second trial was held in 2015. This time, the jury heard additional evidence about Guy's actions before and after the murders. The prosecution argued that Guy had been thinking clearly. He had put the children to bed normally. He had used a kitchen knife from his own home. He had stabbed each child multiple times. These were not the actions of someone who didn't understand what they were doing. On December 6, 2015, the jury found Guy Turcotte guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Second-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence in Canada, but the judge determines the parole ineligibility period, which can range from 10 to 25 years. The judge sentenced Guy to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 17 years. Guy served his minimum sentence. In 2019, after serving approximately 10 years total between his time in psychiatric facilities and prison, Guy Turcotte was granted day parole. In 2022, he was granted full parole. He is now living in the community under supervision. He is forbidden from contacting Isabelle Gaston or any member of her family. Isabelle has spoken publicly about the murders. She has said that she will never forgive Guy for what he did to Olivier and Anne-Sophie. She has said that the parole board's decision to release him was a betrayal of her children's memory. She continues to visit their graves regularly. Olivier was 5 years old, Anne-Sophie was 3. Their father stabbed them a combined total of 46 times because their mother had left him for another man. He stabbed Olivier 27 times. Olivier had defensive wounds showing he fought to live. He stabbed Anne-Sophie 19 times. Then he tried to kill himself so he wouldn't have to face the consequences. He failed. He survived. He served 10 years. Then he was released. Guy Turcotte murdered his children while their mother was with her new partner, then claimed mental illness to avoid responsibility. But the next father in British Columbia smothered and strangled his 3 children and successfully avoided prison entirely. Case 14. Alan Schoenborn. On the afternoon of April 5, 2008, in the small town of Merritt, British Columbia, Alan Schoenborn killed his 3 children. Caitlin was 10 years old, Max was 8, Corden was 5. Alan smothered Caitlin with a pillow. He smothered Max with a plastic bag. He strangled Corden. All 3 children died in their home while their mother was at work. Alan Schoenborn was 40 years old. He had a long history of mental illness, substance abuse, and violence. He had been diagnosed with various psychiatric conditions over the years. He had been in and out of treatment facilities. His relationship with the children's mother, Darcy Clark, had been volatile and abusive. Darcy had left Alan multiple times because of his violence. She had obtained restraining orders, but Alan always found his way back into their lives. In March 2008, Darcy left Alan for the final time. She moved with Caitlin, Max and Corden to a mobile home in Merritt. She got a job at a local Walmart. She was trying to build a stable life for her children away from Alan's violence. But Alan couldn't accept that the relationship was over. He became obsessed with the idea that Darcy was seeing other men. He believed she had chosen someone else over him. On April 5, 2008, Darcy was working the afternoon shift at Walmart. The children were home alone in the mobile home. Alan showed up. He forced his way inside. What happened next was methodical and horrific. Alan went into Caitlin's room first. He smothered his 10-year-old daughter with a pillow. Caitlin fought back. There were signs of a struggle, but Alan overpowered her. She died in her bedroom. Then Alan went to Max's room. He smothered his 8-year-old son with a plastic bag. Max also struggled. He tried to get away, but Alan held the bag over his head until Max stopped breathing. Finally, Alan went to Corden's room. He strangled his 5-year-old son with his bare hands. Corden was too small to fight back. He died quickly. After killing all 3 children, Alan left the mobile home. He wrote a note that said, "You have made me a killer." He was referring to Darcy. He blamed her for the murders. He believed that if she hadn't left him, if she hadn't chosen other men over him, he wouldn't have killed their children. He fled into the woods near Merritt and spent several days hiding from police. On April 6, 2008, Darcy came home from work and found the bodies of Caitlin, Max and Corden. She called 911. Police arrived and confirmed all 3 children were dead. A massive manhunt was launched for Alan Schoenborn. Helicopters, search dogs, and dozens of officers combed the forests around Merritt. On April 9, 2008, Alan was found hiding in a shed approximately 18 kilometers from the crime scene. He was arrested without incident. Alan was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His trial was held in 2010 at the BC Supreme Court in Kamloops. Alan's defence team argued that he was not criminally responsible for his actions due to a mental disorder. They presented evidence that Alan had been suffering from delusions and psychosis at the time of the murders. Psychiatrists testified that Alan believed he was protecting his children from sexual abuse by killing them. He believed Darcy and others were involved in a conspiracy to hurt the children. On September 1, 2010, the jury found Alan Schoenborn not criminally responsible on account of mental disorder. The verdict meant that Alan would not go to prison. Instead, he was sent to a forensic psychiatric hospital. He was held at the Colony Farm Forensic Psychiatric Hospital in Coquitlam, British Columbia. Over the years, Alan has been granted increasing levels of freedom. In 2015, he was granted escorted day passes into the community. In 2017, he was granted unescorted day passes. In 2020, despite objections from Darcy Clark and the community, Alan was granted conditional leave to live in a supportive housing facility. He is required to follow certain conditions. He cannot contact Darcy or any member of her family. He cannot possess weapons. He must continue taking his medication, but he is living in the community. Darcy Clark has fought against every expansion of Alan's privileges. She has appeared at every review board hearing. She has given victim impact statements describing the devastation Alan caused. She has said that Alan should never be allowed to leave the psychiatric facility. She has said that the fact that he is living in the community while her children are dead is a miscarriage of justice. She continues to advocate for changes to the laws surrounding the not criminally responsible designation. Caitlin was 10 years old. Max was 8. Corden was 5. Their father smothered and strangled them because their mother had left him. He blamed her for forcing him to become a killer. He wrote it in a note. Then he hid in the woods while police searched for him. He was found. He was tried. He was found not criminally responsible. He served no prison time. He is now living in the community under supervision. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Alan Schoenborn smothered and strangled his 3 children and avoided prison through a mental disorder defense. But the next father in Ontario used a car and claimed his daughter was trying to escape an abusive mother. Case 15. Robin Brown. On February 9, 2020, in Milton, Ontario, Robin Brown drowned his 8-year-old daughter Ciara Kagan in the bathtub of their home. Ciara had spent the weekend with her father. It was supposed to be a normal custody visit. Instead, Robin filled the bathtub with water, held Ciara under the surface until she drowned, then called 911 and told the dispatcher he had killed his daughter. Robin Brown was 57 years old. He had been in a custody dispute with Ciara's mother, Jennifer Kagan, for years. The relationship between Robin and Jennifer had been acrimonious from the start. They were never married. Ciara was born in 2011. By the time she was a toddler, Robin and Jennifer were fighting over custody arrangements. Robin believed Jennifer was an unfit mother. He made allegations of abuse. He claimed Jennifer was neglectful. He went to court repeatedly trying to gain full custody of Ciara. The courts did not agree with Robin's assessment. Despite his repeated allegations, there was no evidence that Jennifer was abusing or neglecting Ciara. The courts granted Jennifer primary custody with scheduled visitation for Robin. Robin was furious. He felt the system had failed him. He felt the courts were biased in favour of mothers. He continued to file motions and complaints. He continued to allege that Ciara was being harmed in Jennifer's care. On the weekend of February 8th to 9th, 2020, Ciara was staying with Robin for a scheduled visit. On Sunday, February 9th, Robin decided that if he couldn't have full custody of Ciara, then Jennifer wouldn't have her either. He filled the bathtub in his home. He brought Ciara into the bathroom. He held his 8-year-old daughter under the water until she stopped breathing. Ciara fought. She struggled. But Robin was a grown man and Ciara was a small child. She drowned. After killing Ciara, Robin called 911. He told the dispatcher calmly that he had drowned his daughter. He said he did it to protect her from her mother. He said Ciara was being abused and he had no other choice. The dispatcher kept Robin on the phone while police and paramedics rushed to the scene. When officers arrived, they found Ciara's body in the bathtub. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Robin was arrested immediately. He was charged with first-degree murder. During police interviews, Robin showed no remorse. He told detectives that he had done the right thing. He said he had saved Ciara from a life of abuse. He said Jennifer was to blame for Ciara's death because she had refused to give him full custody. He claimed that if the courts had listened to him, Ciara would still be alive. The investigation into Robin's claims found no evidence of abuse. Child Protective Services had investigated Robin's allegations multiple times over the years. Every investigation had found no credible evidence that Ciara was being harmed in Jennifer's care. Teachers, doctors, and family friends all described Ciara as a happy, well-adjusted child who was loved by her mother. Robin's allegations had been nothing more than the paranoid delusions of a man who couldn't accept that he had lost custody. Robin's trial was held in 2021 at the Superior Court of Justice in Milton. The Crown presented evidence of premeditation. Robin had planned to kill Ciara. He had told people in the weeks before the murder that he was losing hope. He had said that drastic action might be necessary. He had filled the bathtub specifically to drown his daughter. This was not a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. This was calculated murder. Robin's defense team tried to argue that he had been suffering from a mental disorder. They presented psychiatric evidence that Robin had delusional beliefs about Jennifer, but the Crown countered that Robin had been functioning normally in every other aspect of his life. He had been working, he had been managing his finances, He had been articulating clear legal arguments in court filings. His delusions were specific to his custody dispute. That did not meet the threshold for not criminally responsible. On September 17, 2021, the jury found Robin Brown guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 16 years. During sentencing, the judge said that Robin had taken Ciara's life in an act of pure selfishness. He had claimed to love his daughter, but love does not manifest in drowning an 8-year-old child in a bathtub. The judge said Robin had destroyed countless lives, including his own. Jennifer Kagan provided a victim impact statement at sentence. She described the unbearable pain of losing Ciara. She described how Ciara had been excited to go to her dad's house that weekend. She described the last time she hugged Ciara and told her she loved her. She described receiving the phone call from police telling her that her daughter was dead. She described the moment she learned that Robin had drowned Ciara in the bathtub. She said she would never forgive Robin and that he had taken the most precious thing in her life. Robin showed no emotion during Jennifer's statement. He stared straight ahead. When given the opportunity to speak, he declined. He was led out of the courtroom and taken to prison. Ciara Kagan was 8 years old. Her father drowned her in a bathtub because he couldn't accept that her mother had primary custody. He called 911 and told them he had killed his daughter to protect her from abuse that didn't exist. He showed no remorse. He blamed everyone except himself. Robin Brown murdered his daughter to punish her mother and to prove a point about the family court system. Ciara paid with her life for her father's delusions. While Robin Brown drowned his daughter in a bathtub and called 911 to confess, the next father in Maryland shot his 4 children execution style while they slept, then set the house on fire to destroy the evidence. Case 16. Darren Boswell Johnson. On the morning of April 22, 2016, firefighters were called to a house fire at 1616 Swan Point Way in Fort Washington, Maryland. When they extinguished the flames and entered the home, they found 4 bodies. Miracle Johnson was 14 years old, Devin Johnson was 9, Zoe Johnson was 5, Cameron Johnson was 9 months old. All 4 children had been shot in the head before the fire started. Their father, Darren Boswell Johnson, was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Darren Boswell Johnson was 45 years old. He worked as a long-haul truck driver. He had been in a relationship with the children's mother, Chantel Johnson, for over a decade. They were never married, but had 4 children together. Miracle was from Chantel's previous relationship, but Darren had helped raise her since she was a toddler. Devin, Zoe and Cameron were Darren's biological children. The relationship between Darren and Chantel had deteriorated over the previous year. Chantel had started a new relationship with another man. She had told Darren she wanted to end their relationship. Darren was furious. He couldn't accept that Chantel had chosen someone else. He couldn't accept that his family was breaking apart. In the weeks before the murders, Darren became increasingly erratic. He made threats. He talked about how he would rather see the children dead than raised by another man. On the night of April 21st, 2016, Chantel was not home. She was staying elsewhere. Darren was alone in the house with Miracle, Devin, Zoe and Cameron. At some point during the night, Darren went into each child's bedroom while they were sleeping. He shot Miracle in the head. She was 14 years old. She died in her bed. He shot Devin in the head. He was 9 years old. He died in his bed. He shot Zoe in the head. She was 5 years old. She died in her bed. He shot Cameron in the head. Cameron was 9 months old, still a baby. He died in his crib. After murdering all 4 children, Darren set fire to the house. He poured accelerant throughout multiple rooms. He wanted to destroy the evidence. He wanted to make it look like the children had died in an accidental fire. Then Darren shot himself in the head. He died in the burning house, alongside the 4 children he had just murdered. Firefighters arrived at approximately 7 o'clock in the morning on April 22nd. Neighbours had called 911 reporting smoke and flames coming from the house. Firefighters battled the blaze and eventually brought it under control. When they entered the home, they found all 5 bodies. The medical examiner determined that all 4 children had died from gunshot wounds to the head, not from the fire. The examiner also determined that Darren had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Prince George's County Police investigated the scene. They found a handgun near Darren's body. They found shell casings in each child's bedroom. They found evidence of accelerant throughout the house. The investigation determined that Darren had murdered the children, set the fire, and then killed himself. There was no evidence that anyone else had been involved. Chantel Johnson was notified of the deaths by police. She was devastated. She had been trying to protect herself and her children from Darren's violence by leaving the relationship. She had feared that Darren might hurt her, but she had never imagined he would murder all 4 of their children. She told police that Darren had been making threats. She said he had told her that if she left him, she would regret it. She said he had told her that the children would be better off dead than raised by another man. Because Darren killed himself, there was no trial. There was no courtroom where Chantel could confront him. There was no jury to hold him accountable. There was no judge to sentence him. Darren had taken that opportunity away by shooting himself. He had murdered 4 children and then escaped all earthly consequences. The Prince George's County community held vigils for Miracle, Devin, Zoe, and Cameron. Hundreds of people attended to mourn the children and support Chantel. A memorial fund was established to help with funeral expenses. The children were buried together. Chantel visits their graves regularly. Miracle was 14 years old. Devin was 9. Zoe was 5. Cameron was 9 months old. Their father shot each of them in the head while they slept. Then he set the house on fire to destroy the evidence. Then he shot himself so he wouldn't have to face the consequences of what he had done. Darren Boswell Johnson murdered his 4 children because their mother had left him for another man. He executed them one by one while they slept. He set the house on fire. Then he killed himself. 4 children dead because a man couldn't accept that his relationship was over. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Darren Boswell Johnson shot his 4 children and set the house on fire. But the next father in California threw his toddler son off a cliff in front of witnesses, then jumped himself. Case 17. Stephen Garcia. On Sunday, July 11, 2010, at Inspiration Point in the San Bernardino Mountains of California, Stephen Garcia threw his 4-year-old son Wyatt off a cliff. Wyatt fell 120 feet down the mountainside. He landed on rocks. He died instantly. Stephen then jumped off the same cliff. He survived the fall with serious injuries. Witnesses at the scenic overlook watched the entire thing happen in broad daylight. Stephen Garcia was 38 years old. He lived in Corona, California. He worked in construction. He had been in a relationship with Wyatt's mother, Ann Campbell, but they were never married. Wyatt was born in 2006. Stephen and Ann separated when Wyatt was still a toddler. The custody arrangement allowed Stephen regular visitation with Wyatt. On the surface, Stephen seemed like a devoted father who loved spending time with his son. But the relationship between Stephen and Ann had become increasingly toxic. Stephen couldn't accept that Ann had moved on. She had started dating other men. Stephen was jealous and controlling. He made threats. He told Ann that if she didn't come back to him, she would regret it. Ann reported some of Stephen's threats to police, but no charges were filed. Stephen continued to see Wyatt for scheduled visits. On the weekend of July 10th to 11th, 2010, Wyatt was staying with Stephen. It was supposed to be a normal father-son weekend. On Sunday morning, Stephen drove Wyatt to the San Bernardino Mountains. He told people they were going on a hike. Inspiration Point is a popular scenic overlook that offers stunning views of the valley below. Families visit regularly. There are guardrails and warning signs. It's meant to be a beautiful, peaceful place. Stephen parked the car and walked with Wyatt to the overlook. Other visitors were there, enjoying the view. It was a clear, sunny morning. Stephen picked up Wyatt. Witnesses thought he was lifting the boy to see the view better. Then Stephen walked to the edge. He threw Wyatt over the guardrail. Wyatt fell 120 feet down the rocky mountainside. He was 4 years old. He died from the impact. Witnesses screamed. Some tried to run towards Stephen to stop him, but Stephen immediately climbed over the guardrail and jumped after Wyatt. He fell the same 120 feet. But Stephen landed differently than Wyatt. He survived the fall. He had multiple broken bones, internal injuries, and head trauma, but he was alive. Emergency responders were called immediately. Helicopters were dispatched. Rescue teams rappelled down the cliff face. They found Wyatt's body on the rocks. He was pronounced dead at the scene. They found Stephen nearby, severely injured but conscious. He was airlifted to Loma Linda University Medical Center. He underwent multiple surgeries to save his life. While Stephen was recovering in the hospital, police interviewed witnesses. Every person at Inspiration Point that morning told the same story. Stephen had deliberately thrown Wyatt off the cliff. This was not an accident. This was not a tragic fall. This was a father murdering his son in front of a dozen witnesses. Stephen was arrested in his hospital bed and charged with first-degree murder. Stephen's trial was held in 2011 at San Bernardino County Superior Court. The prosecution presented testimony from every witness who had been at Inspiration Point that day. They described seeing Stephen pick up Wyatt, walk to the edge, and throw him over the guardrail. They described hearing Wyatt scream as he fell. They described the horror of watching a father murder his son in broad daylight. The evidence was overwhelming. Stephen's defense team tried to argue that he had been suffering from a mental breakdown. They presented psychiatric evidence that Stephen had been depressed. They claimed he had been suicidal and had decided to kill himself and take Wyatt with him so Wyatt wouldn't have to grow up without a father. But the prosecution countered that Stephen's actions were calculated. He had driven to the mountains, he had parked the car, he had walked to the overlook, he had picked up Wyatt and thrown him off the cliff. These were deliberate choices, not the actions of someone who didn't understand what they were doing. On December 1st, 2011, the jury found Stephen Garcia guilty of first-degree murder. The jury also found true the special circumstance that the murder was intentional and involved torture. The torture finding was based on the fact that Wyatt had been conscious during the fall and had experienced terror before he died. This special circumstance made Stephen eligible for the death penalty. During the penalty phase of the trial, the jury heard victim impact statements from Anne Campbell and other family members. Anne described Wyatt as a happy, loving child who trusted his father completely. She described the moment police told her that Stephen had thrown Wyatt off a cliff. She described the unbearable pain of losing her son in such a horrific way. She told the jury that Stephen had murdered Wyatt to punish her for leaving him. Wyatt had died because his father wanted revenge. On January 13, 2012, the jury sentenced Stephen Garcia to death. The judge upheld the sentence. Stephen was sent to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. He remains on death row. California has not executed anyone since 2006 due to ongoing legal challenges to the state's execution protocol. Stephen Garcia will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, but he will never face execution. Wyatt Garcia was 4 years old. His father threw him off a 120-foot cliff in front of witnesses at a scenic overlook on a sunny Sunday morning. Wyatt screamed as he fell. He died on the rocks. His father jumped after him but survived. Stephen murdered his son to punish his son's mother for leaving him. He killed Wyatt in the most public, traumatic way imaginable. Then he tried to kill himself so he wouldn't have to face the consequences. He failed. He survived. He is on death row. While Stephen Garcia threw his son off a cliff in front of witnesses, the next father in Texas drowned his 2 young children in a bathtub in the family home, while their mother begged him to stop over the phone. Case 18. Mohamed Goa. On the evening of September 14, 2010, in Houston, Texas, Mohamed Goa drowned his 2 children in a bathtub. Akbar was 3 years old. Aliyah was 1. Mohamed held each child under the water until they stopped breathing. While he was drowning them, he was on the phone with their mother, Rahela. She could hear the children screaming. She could hear the water splashing. She begged Mohamed to stop. He refused. He told her to listen as he killed their children. Mohamed Goa was 26 years old, originally from Pakistan. He had immigrated to the United States and married Rahela in an arranged marriage. They had 2 children together. Akbar was born in 2007. Aliyah was born in 2009. The family lived in Houston, where Mohamed worked in construction. To people who knew them casually, they seemed like a normal immigrant family trying to build a life in America. But inside the marriage, Rahela was suffering. Mohamed was controlling and abusive. He monitored her every move. He didn't allow her to work. He didn't allow her to have friends. He didn't allow her to speak to her family in Pakistan without his permission. When Rahela defied him, he beat her. The abuse escalated after Aliyah was born. Rahela began planning to leave. In September 2010, Rahela left Mohamed and took Akbar and Aliyah with her. She moved in with family members. She filed for divorce. She obtained a protective order against Mohamed. The court granted her temporary custody of the children with supervised visitation for Mohammed. Mohammed was furious. He felt humiliated that Rahela had left him. In his culture, the husband was the head of the household. The fact that Rahela had defied him and taken his children was an insult he could not accept. Mohammed began calling Rahela constantly. He sent her text messages. He showed up at places where he knew she would be. He violated the protective order repeatedly. He told Rahela that if she didn't come back to him, she would regret it. He told her that the children belonged to him and she had no right to take them. Rahela reported the violations to police. Nothing was done. On September 14, 2010, Mohammed tricked Rahela into allowing him to take Akbar and Aliyah for a visit. He told her he just wanted to see them for a few hours. He promised he would bring them back. Rahela was hesitant, but she agreed. She wanted the children to have a relationship with their father. She handed Akbar and Aliyah over to Mohammed. He drove them back to the house they had lived in together. Once Mohammed had the children at the house, he called Rahela. He told her that she would never see Akbar and Aliyah again. Rahela begged him to return the children. She told him she would call the police. Mohammed laughed. He told her to call the police. He said it didn't matter because the children would be dead before the police arrived. Rahela could hear Akbar and Aliyah crying in the background. She could hear Mohammed filling a bathtub with water. She screamed into the phone, begging Mohammed to stop. Mohammed put the phone on speaker so Rahela could hear everything. He took 3-year-old Akbar into the bathroom. Rahela heard splashing. She heard Akbar screaming. She heard Mohammed telling Akbar to be quiet. Then the screaming stopped. Mohammed told Rahela that Akbar was dead. Rahela was hysterical. She was screaming and crying. She was begging Mohammed to spare Aliyah. Mohammed ignored her. He took 1-year-old Aliyah into the bathroom. Rahela heard splashing again. She heard Aliyah crying. Aliyah was too young to scream or fight back. She was just a baby. The crying stopped. Mohammed told Rahela that Aliyah was dead too. Mohammed stayed on the phone with Rahela. He told her that she had caused this. He told her that if she had stayed with him and been a good wife, the children would still be alive. He told her that she had killed Akbar and Aliyah by leaving him. Then Mohammed hung up the phone. Rahela immediately called 911. She told the dispatcher that her husband had just drowned their 2 children. She gave the dispatcher the address of the house. Police rushed to the scene. They found Mohammed still in the house with the bodies of Akbar and Aliyah. Both children were in the bathtub. They were dead. Mohammed was sitting calmly in the living room. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to hide. He was arrested without incident. Mohammed was charged with 2 counts of capital murder. Capital murder in Texas carries either the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mohammed's trial was held in 2012 at the Harris County Criminal Court in Houston. The prosecution presented evidence that Mohammed had planned the murders. He had lured Rahela into giving him the children. He had called her specifically so she could hear them die. He had taunted her while he drowned them. This was premeditated, calculated murder designed to inflict maximum suffering on Rahela. The defense tried to argue that Mohammed had been suffering from cultural stress and adjustment issues as an immigrant. They claimed he had been overwhelmed by the pressures of living in America and had snapped. The prosecution dismissed this argument. Mohammed had been functioning normally in every aspect of his life. He had been working, he had been managing finances, he had been articulating clear threats to Rahela. He knew exactly what he was doing when he drowned Akbar and Aliyah. On April 19, 2012, the jury found Mohammed Gohar guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. During the penalty phase, the jury heard victim impact statements from Rahela and other family members. Rahela described the moment she heard Akbar and Aliyah die over the phone. She described the screams. She described the silence that followed. She described living every day with the knowledge that her children had called for her while they were drowning and she couldn't save them. She told the jury that Mohammed had destroyed her life and that she would never recover from what he had done. On April 25, 2012, the jury sentenced Mohammed Gohar to death. The judge upheld the sentence. Mohammed was sent to death row at the Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas. He remains on death row, awaiting execution. Texas does execute death row inmates, unlike California. Mohammed Gohar will eventually be executed by lethal injection for the murders of Akbar and Aliyah. Akbar was 3 years old. Aliyah was 1. Their father drowned them in a bathtub, while their mother listened over the phone. He made her hear them die. He told her it was her fault for leaving him. He sat calmly in the living room with their bodies and waited for police to arrive. He showed no remorse. He is on death row. Before we move on to the next case, make sure to subscribe if you're finding these stories as disturbing as I am. It helps us keep covering the cases that most channels won't touch. Mohammed Gohar drowned his children while their mother listened on the phone. But the next father in South Africa threw his 4 children off a bridge one by one, then jumped himself and survived to face trial. Case 19. Sibusiso Mpungose. On the morning of September 22, 2019, on the Umlaas Road Bridge near Pinetown, South Africa, Sibusiso Mpungose threw his 4 children off a bridge one by one. Kwesi was 9 years old, Shaniqua was 8, Snedlantla was 6, Ayanda was 4. Each child fell approximately 40 metres, 131 feet, into the Mlaas River Gorge below. All 4 children died. Sibusiso then jumped off the bridge himself. He survived the fall with serious injuries. Sibusiso Mpungose was 40 years old, from Esigangeni, KwaZulu-Natal province. He worked as a taxi driver. He had been in a relationship with the children's mother, Zolisile Majoka, but they were never married. They had 4 children together. The relationship between Sibusiso and Kolisile had been troubled for years. Sibusiso was controlling and possessive. He couldn't accept that Kolisile wanted to end the relationship. In 2019, Kolisile left Sibusiso and began seeing another man. Sibusiso was enraged. He made repeated threats. He told Kolisile that if she didn't come back to him, he would take the children away from her permanently. He told people in the community that Kolisile would regret leaving him. He told his own family that he was planning something that would make sure Zolisile suffered for the rest of her life. On the morning of September 22, 2019, Sibusiso picked up Kwesi, Shaniqua, Snedlantla and Ayanda from their home. He told Kolisile he was taking them to visit his family. Kolisile agreed. She had no reason to suspect that Sibusiso was planning to murder them. She kissed each child goodbye and watched them get into Sibusiso's taxi. Sibusiso drove the children to the Umlaas Road Bridge near Pinetown. The bridge spans a deep gorge above the Mlaas River. It's a busy road during the day. Cars pass constantly. Sibusiso parked the taxi on the side of the bridge. He got out. He opened the back door. He picked up 9-year-old Kwesi and carried her to the edge of the bridge. Witnesses in passing cars saw what was happening. They honked their horns. They shouted. But Sibusiso threw Kwesi over the railing. She fell 40 metres into the gorge. She died on impact. Sibusiso went back to the taxi. He picked up 8-year-old Shaniqua. Witnesses had stopped their cars by this point. Some were calling police. Others were running towards Sibusiso trying to stop him. Sibusiso threw Shaniqua over the railing. She fell 40 metres. She died on impact. Sibusiso went back to the taxi again. He picked up 6-year-old Snedlantla. People were screaming at him to stop. Some tried to physically intervene, but Sibusiso was faster. He threw Snedlantla over the railing. She fell 40 metres. She died on impact. Sibusiso went back to the taxi one last time. He picked up 4-year-old Ayanda. By this point, a crowd had gathered. People were trying to grab Sibusiso. They were trying to pull Ayanda away from him. But Sibusiso ran to the railing and threw Ayanda over. She fell 40 metres. She died on impact. After throwing all 4 of his children to their deaths, Sibusiso climbed over the railing and jumped. He fell the same 40 metres into the gorge, but unlike his children, Sibusiso survived. He landed in a way that didn't kill him instantly. He suffered severe injuries, including broken bones, internal bleeding, and head trauma, but he was alive. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. They rappelled down into the gorge. They found the bodies of Kwesi, Shaniqua, Snedlantla, and Ayanda. All 4 children were dead. They found Sibusiso nearby, severely injured but conscious. He was airlifted to hospital. He underwent multiple surgeries. He survived. While Sibusiso was recovering in hospital, police interviewed witnesses. More than a dozen people had watched Sibusiso throw his children off the bridge one by one. The evidence was overwhelming. Sibusiso was arrested in his hospital bed and charged with 4 counts of murder. Sibusiso's trial was held in 2020 at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. The prosecution presented testimony from witnesses who had seen the murders. They described watching Sibusiso throw each child off the bridge, while others screamed and tried to stop him. They described the horror of watching 4 children fall to their deaths. The prosecution presented evidence that Sibusiso had planned the murders. He had told people he was going to make Solisile suffer. He had picked up all 4 children at once. He had driven them to a specific location where he knew they would die. This was premeditated murder. Sibusiso's defense team tried to argue that he had been suffering from depression and had experienced a mental breakdown. They presented psychiatric evidence that Sibusiso had been devastated by the breakup with Solisile. But the prosecution countered that Sibusiso's actions showed clear intent. He had driven to the bridge, he had parked the taxi, he had thrown each child off one by one despite people trying to stop him. These were deliberate, calculated actions. On September 9, 2020, Judge Esther Stein found Sibusiso Mpungose guilty of 4 counts of murder. During sentencing, Judge Stein said that Sibusiso had committed one of the most heinous crimes she had ever encountered. She said that he had used his own children as instruments of revenge against their mother. She said there were no mitigating factors that could reduce the severity of his sentence. On September 10, 2020, Judge Stein sentenced Sibusiso Mpungose to 4 life sentences, 1 for each child he murdered. The sentences would run concurrently, meaning Sibusiso would serve a single life term. He was sent to Westville Prison in Durban. He will never be eligible for parole. Solisile Mjoka provided a victim impact statement at the trial. She described the moment police told her that Sibusiso had thrown their children off a bridge. She described identifying the bodies of Kwesi, Shaniqua, Snenhlanhla, and Ayanda. She described the unbearable pain of losing all 4 of her children in a single morning. She told the court that Sibusiso had destroyed her life. She said she would never forgive him and that she hoped he would suffer in prison for the rest of his life. Kwesi was 9 years old, Shaniqua was 8, Snenhlanhla was 6, Ayanda was 4. Their father threw them off a bridge one by one in front of witnesses in broad daylight. Each child fell 40 meters to their death. Their father jumped after them but survived. He is serving 4 life sentences, while Sibusiso Mpungose threw his children off a bridge in 2019. The final case we're covering happens nearly 2 decades earlier in South Africa, when another father used fire to murder his 5 children and destroy all evidence of what he had done. Case 20. Jannie Beukes. On March 18, 2000, in Rustenburg, South Africa, Jannie Beukes burned his 5 children to death. Ansel was 8 years old, Johan was 7, Jacko was 5, JP was 3, Michelle was 18 months old. Jannie locked them inside a car, poured petrol over the vehicle, and set it on fire. All 5 children burned to death. Jannie then attempted suicide by drinking rat poison. He survived. Jannie Beukes was 30 years old, a police officer in Rustenburg. He had been married to the children's mother, Rihanna Beukes, since 1991. They had 5 children together. To people in the community, Jannie appeared to be a devoted father and husband. He worked as a police officer. He attended church. He coached his children's sports teams. The family lived in a middle-class neighbourhood in Rustenburg. Nobody suspected that behind closed doors, Jannie was abusive and controlling. Rihanna endured years of emotional and psychological abuse from Jannie. He controlled her finances. He controlled who she could see and where she could go. He told her she was worthless without him. But in early 2000, Rihanna decided she had had enough. She told Jannie she wanted a divorce. She told him she was taking the children and leaving. Jannie couldn't accept it. He told Rihanna that if she left him, she would lose everything. He told her she would regret it for the rest of her life. On the weekend of March 18, 2000, Rihanna left the house to run errands. She left Ansel, Johan, Jaco, JP and Michelle in Jannie's care. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. Rihanna expected to return home in a few hours, but while she was gone, Jannie decided that if Rihanna was going to take the children away from him, then she wouldn't have them at all. Jannie gathered all 5 children and told them they were going somewhere. He led them outside to the family car. He told them to get in. Ansel, Johan, Jacko and JP climbed into the back seat. Jannie secured 18-month-old Michelle in her car seat. The children thought they were going on a drive. They had no idea what their father was planning. Once all 5 children were in the car, Jannie closed the doors and locked them. The children couldn't get out. He went to the garage and retrieved a container of petrol. He returned to the car and began pouring petrol over the vehicle. The children inside started to panic. They were banging on the windows. They were screaming for their father to let them out. But Gianni ignored them. Gianni struck a match and threw it onto the petrol-soaked car. The vehicle erupted in flames. The children inside screamed. They tried to break the windows. They tried to unlock the doors, but the flames spread too quickly. The intense heat overwhelmed them. Ansel was 8 years old. Johan was 7. Jacko was 5. JP was 3. Michelle was 18 months old. All 5 children burned to death inside the car while their father watched. After the children were dead, Gianni went inside the house and drank rat poison. He intended to kill himself. He wanted to die alongside his children. But the poison didn't kill him. He became violently ill, but survived. Neighbours had seen the smoke and called the fire department. Firefighters arrived and extinguished the flames. They found the charred remains of 5 children inside the car. They found Gianni inside the house, sick from the poison, but alive. Gianni was rushed to hospital. He was treated for poisoning. Once he was medically stable, he was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder. Police found no evidence that anyone else had been involved. The investigation determined that Gianni had deliberately murdered his children to punish Rihanna for leaving him. Rihanna Bukers was notified of the deaths by police. She had been out running errands. She returned home expecting to see her children. Instead, she found fire trucks, police cars, and a burned-out vehicle containing the bodies of her 5 children. The trauma was unimaginable. She had left them with their father for a few hours. She came back to find them all dead. Gianni's trial was held in 2001 at the Northwest High Court in Rustenburg. The prosecution presented evidence that Gianni had planned the murders. He had gathered all 5 children. He had locked them in the car. He had poured petrol over the vehicle. He had set it on fire. These were deliberate, premeditated actions designed to kill. The prosecution argued that Gianni had murdered his children to punish Rihanna for wanting a divorce. Gianni's defense team tried to argue that he had been suffering from severe depression and had not been in his right mind. They presented psychiatric evidence that Gianni had been devastated by Rihanna's decision to leave, but the prosecution countered that Gianni's actions showed clear planning and intent. He had chosen a method that would ensure all 5 children died. He had locked them in the car so they couldn't escape. He had poured enough petrol to guarantee a fatal fire. This was calculated murder. On July 13, 2001, the court found Gianni Bukers guilty of 5 counts of murder. Judge Jan Kluter sentenced him to 5 life sentences, 1 for each child he murdered. The sentences would run concurrently. Gianni was sent to prison. He will never be eligible for parole. Rihanna provided a victim impact statement at the trial. She described the unbearable pain of losing all 5 of her children in a single day. She described how Ansel had been excited about starting grade 3. She described how Johan had just learned to ride a bicycle. She described how Jacko had loved playing soccer. She described how JP had been learning to talk in full sentences. She described how Michelle had just started walking. She described all the futures that were stolen from her children because their father decided they should die. She told the court that Gianni had destroyed her life and that she would never recover from what he had done. Ansel was 8 years old, Johan was 7, Jacko was 5, JP was 3, Michelle was 18 months old. Their father locked them in a car, poured petrol over it, and set it on fire. They burned to death while their father watched. Then he drank rat poison to kill himself. He survived. He is serving 5 life sentences. Gianni Bukers murdered his 5 children to punish their mother for wanting a divorce. He burned them alive inside a car in their own driveway. He survived his suicide attempt and now lives in prison, while Rihanna lives with the knowledge that she left her children with their father for a few hours and came home to find them all dead. If you enjoyed this deep dive into fathers who killed their children to spite their ex-wife, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.